What happens when you die? Well, you might automatically revert to your conditioning and what you were programmed to believe as a child and growing up. But let's talk about consciousness and the universe. Does consciousness leak into the universe? Let's find out.
The Voices of Victory podcast show.
Voices of Victory.
Vision.
Voices of Victory.
Leadership.
Voices of Victory.
Workplace-related topics.
The Voices of Victory.
Voices of Victory. Voices of Victory. Voices of Victory.
It's time for the show. You are now listening to the Voices of Victory podcast show.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mario D. Leone.
Hello and welcome back to the Voices of Victory podcast show. Today's got a very special, particular episode. This is Consciousness After Death. Does consciousness leak into the universe? It's the big, solid question. We could track this idea into many different directions. This is a question that's haunted every culture, every philosophy, every religion, and every big thinker. What happens after we die? Are we a soul? Do we have one? This is the big question from a consciousness aspect. And science has often tried to stay silent here. And yet, ironically, it's some of the greatest scientific minds of the last century who leaned closer to the mystery and has not turned away from it. Physicists like Planck, Schrödinger, Bohm, Wigner, and Wheeler. These are not fringe thinkers that people want to try to debase, but these are giants. And you know what? They've shaped the very foundation of quantum mechanics. They all converged on one radical, solid insight, is that consciousness may not be a byproduct of matter. It may be a fundamental idea that is connected to our very fabric of reality. The big leak, as I call it. The leak of consciousness into the universe. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, they gave us one of the most boldest models, the Orch-OR theory. They argue that consciousness emerges from quantum processes inside of the brain's microtubules. And here's where it gets provocative and it gets interesting. When the brain shuts down, those quantum states, they don't just vanish. They could, in theory, dissipate back into the quantum field. A kind of leak into the fabric of the universe itself. A leak of our consciousness back into the unified field. It's a poetic idea. Death not as the end, but as some kind of diffusion. And that brings us over to the non-local mind. Others like Schrödinger, David Bohm, they spoke of the mind not as something that the brain creates, but something the brain actually channels. In this view, the brain is a receiver, a tuning instrument, if you will. And when that receiver breaks, the signal doesn't die, it simply returns to the universal field in which it actually came from. That's not theology, that's physics flirting and connecting to science and philosophy. That's what that's about. And then there's the simplest idea, but the most enduring point here was that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It simply transforms. If energy is in some way energetic, then death is not annihilation, but a mere transformation. The question is, into what? And this raises a deeper layer. If cells are the basic units of all living things, then what's behind that? Because at their core, underneath the cells, it's energy. And that's moving through molecules, through atoms, through forms that shift but never vanish. So if energy moves through form after form after form, never being destroyed, could consciousness, if it's tied to that energy, could consciousness actually do it? Could it follow the same eternal rule? And the hard truth, and here's where I have to be very clear with you, is that there is no direct scientific evidence that human consciousness survives death. It leaks into the universe, or it continues in any measurable way. Not in quantum biology, not in lab experiments. The Princeton Pear Lab, they hinted at mind-matter interactions. The Orch-OR has hints in biology. But in terms of proof, no. The miracle behind every mystery is what we need to understand. And yet, here's what actually stuns me. Despite no proof, despite decades of skepticism and dry polemics, the greatest minds of quantum physics, the men who have come together, who could have easily written consciousness off off. Instead, they leaned into it and said, you know what? Matter may be downstream of mind. And how can we further understand that downstream of mind? Well, here's how we can understand it. They didn't all agree on what consciousness is or where it goes, but they all agreed on this. They agreed on consciousness is not an accident. It is woven into reality itself. And here's where I'm going to finally close this show. Here's what we want to understand is that maybe the real miracle isn't that we know what happens after death or what we believe or what we've been conditioned to understand, the narratives that have been brought to life since our childhood. The miracle is that some of the most brilliant scientists in history, people who have mapped the atom, bent actual light, and refined space and time, they looked at consciousness and whispered the very same conclusion as the mystics. And here's what they came up with. That it's not fragile, it's not disposable, and it's not random. That it may, in ways that we don't understand yet, outlast us. And if they were right, then when we die, the consciousness doesn't just vanish. It merges, it returns, it leaks out, it continues, and it's woven into the same mystery that first gave us life. If I'm going to make a mistake or an error in that thinking, especially when I'm going to be dead anyway, then that's one that I can actually accept. Because within that very idea, there's peace and transcendence of my soul moving forward in the shape of energy. And let's face it, below the cells, and if the cells are the unit of all living things, then below that is energy. This is Voices of Victory. Catch you on the next episode.